You need wide receivers to fix your bad fantasy football team, and we have you covered. Of course, we would be remiss if before we get into our list, me and Danny both have 2 wide receiver trade targets that we're going after, 1 guy that we're selling. There is an official reissue of last week's list that Garrett Wilson and Brandon Ayuk are both still very, very good trade targets. Danny, you can add any other names if you want to, but we're not going to talk about those guys again. We'll talk about new names, but Garrett Wilson and Ayuk definitely still good names to go after.
Yeah, and I also talked about Rome Odunze a couple of weeks ago. I mean, we could rehash that. I had actually listed as honorable mention for the Bears receivers. Basically, I'm just going to talk about it right now. If you can get the Bears receivers for basement level prices, like we're talking about Rome Odunze being valued as a wide receiver 5, maybe DJ Moore in your leagues being valued as a, high-end wide receiver 3 at this point, I'd be willing to engage in those talks because I do think moving forward, we see better from the Chicago passing game, but not going to spend too much time there. That's a pretty straw man take at this point, where if the Bears offense clicks, that probably the 2 talented wide receivers are going to start producing. We'll just get on to the first official buy. And I mean, we kind of talked about, underproducing players at this point. T. Higgins to me is a screaming buy because when you're actually looking at his usage versus his overall point production, it is night and day. We're looking at T. Higgins in the last 2 weeks since he came back from that preseason hamstring injury. 91% of the routes, 22% target per route run, 23% target share in that stretch. He also has about 40% of the team air yards, and that's only resulted in 9.4 PPR points per game. And the reason why I think he's one of the bigger buys is that when you look at this usage, this screams wide receiver 2 level usage, but then you also combine that with the fact that this is probably the basement price for the Cincy offense moving forward. People already understand, okay, Chase is going to be an alpha wide receiver 1, sure. But the other remaining parts of this Bengals offense, I think are extremely affordable on the market. We haven't seen the Cincinnati 45-point offensive week. We haven't seen the T. Higgins 8-catch, 126-yard, 2-touchdown week. We know that those are going to be baked in. I mean, we were talking about it throughout the offseason that while they're kind of volatile in terms of the weeks that are going to be coming, the weekly ceiling, because of what we expect from this offense, is going to be high. So although T. Higgins hasn't had that blow-up week yet, I think it's going to come sooner rather than later. I don't know if that's next week. I don't know if it's this week. I don't even know if it's in 3 weeks from now. But the point is, we want pieces of this offense because we expect Joe Burrow to be one of the highest passing yard leaders, highest passing touchdown leaders by the end of the season. And T. Higgins, to me right now, is a wide receiver 2 that's priced as a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, and I think when you look ahead to the Bengals schedule, they're in the highest over-under game total of the week this week against the Baltimore Ravens. So that's definitely great news. They're at home versus the Ravens. Should be a good matchup. And Chase notoriously has killed Baltimore, so there's a very good chance they'll try and take him out of that game. Next week, home for the Giants, also an easy matchup. Cleveland in week 7, not super easy, but then Philly and Las Vegas in week 8 and in week 9. So, I mean, 4 of his next 5 games, he's in a really good spot. And T. Higgins, as a T. Higgins manager, and it really annoys me that all of these guys we've talked about so far, Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, of course, these are the guys that I have in both my home league and our flock league. I have some combination of those players. Every T. Higgins manager has been watching him and like, he could have had a bigger game. Like, he had end zone targets in his first game back. He had 2 of them, I believe it was. Couldn't quite come down with a touchdown. He had another play on the sideline that got called back. Didn't get his second foot in bounds. He's this close to having a big game. And I think that's why you're buying, because when you're that close to having a big game, normally, eventually you'll have one, especially in an offense that's just starting to figure things out. They are now getting back all 3 of these top guys, the 2 running backs and the tight end position with Eric all kind of coming into his own. The offense is coming into shape. And I think T. Higgins is going to have a big game here soon.
Well, I think part of it too is that outside of Jamar Chase, we know this is a very concentrated target hierarchy. We know Jamar Chase is going to command his, high 20s level target share. Whenever T. Higgins is healthy, he's in the, low to mid 20s area. And outside of that, I mean, it's not like you have a big target commanding tight end. You don't have a big, Alvin Kamara, insert receiving running back, Christian McCaffrey. You don't have that type of running back that's going to be commanding 5 to 8 targets per game out of the backfield. And although Andre Yoshavash, you guys can correct my pronunciation in the comments, he's looked good. It's not like he's a guy that you can expect to be a 20-plus target share type of player moving forward. He's more so, your volatile wide receiver 3, 15 to 17% target share player, I think, when T. Higgins is in the lineup. So to me, I just want insulation in this offense, and I expect this offense to be a top 5 to 8 unit moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's annoying to me that all of my players are on buy low lists instead of the list of players that we should be, selling high, for example, because they're overperforming. But the next guy I also have in my home league, I have both of these players, T. Higgins and Drake London, who is my buy number 1 at wide receiver. he's an absolute alpha right now, man. He has 28% target share on the season. He's been an alpha his whole career. We've kind of known this at this point, and he will continue to be one. Kirk Cousins in week 1 against the Steelers had 155 yards passing. The offense looked terrible. Since then, he's passed for 230 plus passing yards in every game so far, despite some tougher defenses like the Saints last week, the Kansas City Chiefs 2 games before that. This offense runs through Drake London. As any Kyle Pitts manager will tell you, Drake London is the guy earning the targets here. And we're going to see both him and Bijan, who I talked about in the running back video, start to perform here. Jacob Gibbs had this tweet that I thought was interesting. Per Fantasy Points data, first read target share by week, or target rate by week, 47% in week 2, 41% in week 3, 50% in week 4. Malik Neighbors is the only player with a higher target rate on first read plays. So when Kirk Cousins drops back, the way that they're calling the offense is to get Drake London the football. Kirk Cousins looking Drake London's way right off of the snap. Drake London is going to have his big game. He's been solid. I mean, he's got like 17, 18, 12 PPR points the last couple of weeks, but the bigger game is coming. He's also separating against man coverage at a top 10 rate as well.
Yeah, no, he's looked very good. And you mentioned the Kyle Pitts point, and I was as high as anybody was on Kyle Pitts, but the early returns are not looking good. In fact, in the Flock League, I actually picked up Cade Otton because I'm terrified to put Kyle Pitts into my lineup right now. When you're looking at Kyle Pitts' usage, in week 1, 100% of the routes, 14% of the targets. Since then, 74% of the routes, 81% of the routes, and then it bottomed out this week at 67% of the routes and only 9% of the targets. Flat out, I mean, we gotta recognize this early rather than wait until it's too late. Kyle Pitts is not playing like Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts doesn't look like the same player that we said when he broke out as a rookie. Kyle Pitts, I don't know if it's the knee injuries. I don't know if it's confidence in himself. I don't know what it is, but every clip that I see of Kyle Pitts at this point, he's just not moving like the prospect I saw coming out of Florida. It's just that simple. If Kyle Pitts is going to be a net negative on the field, which is what he's been for the Falcons offense thus far, their only real source in the passing game is Drake London and is Bijan Robinson. And of course, I mean, Darnell Mooney and Ray McLeod are going to be doing their thing, but realistically, those are the 2 functional focal points of this Falcons offense.
Yeah, exactly. And right now you can go out and get Drake London. I mean, some of the trades you guys can see per our Flock Fantasy Trade Finder, which is a free tool. If you guys want to go check out some trades that have happened in a lot of Sleeper and ESPN and Yahoo leagues, head on over to Flock Fantasy, use code FSC, of course. But this is actually a free tool that you can use. Devontae Adams, Antonio Gibson for Ladd McConkey, Drake London, Mike Evans and Drake London for Tyreek Hill, Zamir White. Again, if you needed more depth at wide receiver, that would make a lot of sense. DJ Moore and Jameson Williams. If you're trying to up tier to a Drake London, I think that makes a lot of sense as well. The usage and the data suggests that Drake London is actually having a wide receiver 1 season minus the actual production. And as I talked about with Bijan, I think this Falcons offense is really going to start to figure things out because Cousins pretty much looks better every single game. Like as a Drake London manager myself, I can tell you right now that each game I watch Drake London, each game I watch Kirk Cousins, it looks better. It's not, 100% where we thought it would be coming into the season, but by week 8, week 9, week 10, there's a very good chance this Falcons offense is a top 5 to 10 passing unit.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I feel like people understand that, Drake London, mid to low end wide receiver 2, he's been fine, whatever. Like, I think he's like the wide receiver 22 on the season. The reason why he's a buy is that this usage would dictate low end wide receiver 1 type of usage. And if Drake London can just get a little bit luckier in terms of the target quality that he's receiving, I mean, the guy's put out 3 straight solid performances. He just hasn't had that, I mean, I always reference like just random stat lines, but I could see Drake London this week going out there, 13 targets, 9 receptions, 113 receiving yards and a touchdown, and people are going to be talking about him as a wide receiver 1 after the season or after the week. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the usage dictates that he should be treated very similarly to like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or somebody like that back-end wide receiver 1 type of guy, and that's not how he's being treated right now. So Drake London, T. Higgins, again, a little bit of copium because I have both of those guys in my home league, so I feel quite good that they're on this list. I would feel better if they were actually performing to the level that I think they can perform to. Amari Cooper, somebody I traded away a couple of weeks ago, a guy that you have as a buy right now.
Maybe try to buy back. All jokes aside, though, I mean, I think Zach kind of knows what he's got here. With Amari Cooper, again, I fully understand at this point that the offense looks like a dumpster fire. People are completely out on Deshaun Watson. People are completely out on just watching this Browns offense. I mean, at the end of the day, when you have the choice of watching really, 25, 26 other offense in the NFL or the Browns, you're choosing the 25 or 26 other offenses because it is bleak. I'm not going to lie. Having a Browns player at this point is not a sexy move, especially when you have to go on Sunday and watch these guys play. However, when you're looking at Amari Cooper's usage, this is that of a wide receiver 1. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's running over 90% of the team routes at 95%, 20% targets per route run, 25% target share, 42% share of the air yards. And on top of that, I mean, anytime they are in the red zone, are inside the 5, inside the 10-yard line, has a 60% share of the end zone targets. The problem, of course, is that's only equated to 10.7 PPR points per game. It's almost like the inverse of T. Higgins. Not really the inverse, because I think T. Higgins obviously is getting great usage in his own right, but people understand that the Bengals offense will be improving moving forward. It's almost like because of how pessimistic people are on the Browns offense, they're devaluing Amari Cooper even further than they should. He's getting wide receiver 1 usage, and I think even if you factor in the Browns offense, you have to be considering him as like a low-end wide receiver 2, because quite frankly, 25% of the targets, it's too good to be considered as a wide receiver 3, like many people are on the current market for Amari Cooper. So on top of that, I think there's a very real possibility this situation gets very clean moving forward, because when you're looking at the semantics of the NFL, there's a lot of top contenders, top offenses that need help at wide receiver right now. We've already reported Diontae Adams is apparently seeking a trade. Of course, teams are going to be involved in that mix. But guess what? There's probably about 3 to 5 teams that need to be trading for a wide receiver by the NFL deadline. And guess what? Diontae Adams is only going to one of those teams. Most likely will end up being the Jets, but even if the Jets don't get Diontae Adams, we're looking at the Jets, we're looking at the Chiefs, we're looking at the Cowboys. The Saints got rumored in the Diontae Adams sweepstakes as well. There's so many contending teams, good offenses that need a number 2 wide receiver. And I think that is exactly what Amari Cooper profiles to be. If he's the number 2 to Garrett Wilson, if he's the number 2, I mean, possibly even the number 1 on the Chiefs, but number 2 weapon in the offense after Travis Kelce. And of course, because of the Cowboys, he's instantly the wide receiver 2, potentially second weapon on what should be a very improved offense moving forward. So when I'm looking at the situation, if the Browns go to 1-4, if the Browns go to 1-5, what is the point of keeping Amari Cooper on this team? You could say, oh, let's salvage what we get out of Deshaun Watson. I think at this point, you kind of know that Deshaun Watson's not going to end up being the future of this team. And in fact, getting rid of Amari Cooper on this offense may position you to be better suited to get the next quarterback if you believe in a Scherzer Sanders, Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, obviously getting some buzz after that big win against Georgia. A lot of quarterbacks that, while it's a weak quarterback class, teams will convince themselves as being the savior of their franchise. And at this point, the Browns are just simply not trending towards being a team that can win 9, 10, 11 games to make it worth it to keep Amari Cooper on this roster, because this is a guy that has a number in terms of his cap hit if a team were to trade for him at $940K. And if you wait until the deadline, the acquiring team will get $600K on their cap hit. That is a huge alluring point, attractive point for a team wanting to trade for him, because you're not taking $22.6 million of cap hit with Amari Cooper. You're taking $600,000. So even though we joke about the Cowboys are cheap as hell, I'm sure any team would be willing to take Amari Cooper and what he's able to do from a production standpoint for $600K for half a year.
Yeah, I mean, even if he stays on Cleveland, I think the situation is bound to improve. I mean, they're playing the Commanders this week, which projects to be probably a pretty high-scoring game. They have the Eagles the week after and the Bengals and the Ravens after that. So those are all potentially high-scoring games. Teams that we know can put up points. It's also worth noting that neither of Jedrick Wills or Jack Conklin has played a game this year for the Cleveland Browns offense. They're starting offensive tackles and what I would consider to be, probably a top 10 tackle duo in the league. That none of them have played a game this year. So Watson has been bad, of course. He should be better than he is given what he's being paid. But even if Amari Cooper it stays with Cleveland for the rest of the year, he's on the Cleveland Browns for the rest of the season. I think that once those tackles can start to get a little bit healthier and some of these game environments, like I said, profile to be, high scoring game environments where the Browns will have to score points, he could still just have a good production, uptick over the next couple of weeks with the Browns.
Yeah, this overall is going to be the basement valuation for Amari Cooper in this Browns offense. People are so pessimistic. They don't want pieces of this Browns offense right now, but there's one of two paths, like we said, for Amari. He either gets dealt to a contender where automatically the offensive insulation is going to increase no matter where he goes. Again, like I said, 26 better offenses, more than likely even more in the NFL at this current stage than what the Browns have showed. Or B, like you said, the tackle duo comes in, they're healthy. This Browns passing offense does increase moving forward. And like you said, Amari Cooper's got a very favorable schedule. So if you're looking at some of these deals, like Mark Andrews at this point, I can very comfortably say is a bust in fantasy. So if you can package Mark Andrews plus Wan'Dale Robinson, assuming that you can pick up a Tucker Kraft, you can pick up even like a Cade Otton, I'm more than willing to do this for Amari Cooper. This next deal, Amari, Devon Achane, Jordan Addison. I mean, we just mentioned Devon Achane as being one of the biggest buy low running backs in fantasy earlier today, if you guys were watching that video. So if you can make this type of move, Amari Cooper for Brian Thomas, again, Maybe you slightly prefer Brian Thomas, but I think they have similar projections moving forward. And then McCaffrey and Mason for Devon Achane and Addison. I'm willing to make that transition as well. Amari Cooper for Addison straight up. I think that's a very fair deal as well. Yes, you're maybe losing out on a potential insulation for what the Vikings offenses look like, but you're getting a better target commanding player with Amari Cooper. And then these other two deals at the bottom here, like Kelsey, Cooper, and Sutton for Pollard and Dobbins. Absolutely, you're doing that. This other deal, I mean, Cooper and just kind of negligible, but you're also getting Brandon Ayuk. I'm more than comfortable doing that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think Cooper, I mean, I have him as just inside my top 28 wide receivers rest of the season. Yeah. I think if you're able to, get off of Jameson Williams, he had a big performance this week against the Seahawks with a long touchdown. Ladd McConkey starting to come into his own. Terry McLaurin, we talked about last week as a potential sell high. Jordan Addison just had a good game coming off of his injury. Diontae Johnson, I'll talk about in a little bit. Some of those guys I would prefer Amari Cooper to going forward. I think it's also worth noting, just while we're talking about AFC North wide receivers the last couple times here, is that Zay Flowers is also a half decent buy low, just because the Ravens have been killing the two teams that they've played the last two games. And I think the run splits that people are pulling for the Cowboys game and for the Buffalo Bills game are a little skewed. I mean, Zay Flowers had 10 plus targets in the first two games when the Ravens were not in a game script like that.
I'm a little bit more concerned with Zay. Again, I think he should be valued more so in like the mid to back end wide receiver 3 range, simply because I am concerned about the passing volume. And although the game scripts have been influenced by the run game in the last 2 weeks, it's not like they're playing against bad opponents. Like, they played the Cowboys and the Bills. There's going to be games where they play against, I mean, if we're just thinking like
Baltimore versus the Giants. But just generally speaking, in the NFL, like, games are close.
There's going to be more parity for sure.
There's like 13, 14 games a season, even if you're a really good team, are going to be close games. That's just the way that it works. So they've had 2 like blowout wins the last couple of weeks. It doesn't matter really who the opponents are, in my opinion. I think even if they played bad teams the rest of the season, there's a good chance that like 80% of those games are closer.
Yeah, and that's why we can't just say, oh yeah, they beat the Bills 35-10. They're going to beat X team 48-10 because they're that much worse than the Bills. Like, yeah, that's not how the NFL works. I understand that. However, I do think this is a team that's probably going to win like 13 or 14 games. They look really dominant right now. But either way, I think that's a fine shout. AFC North theme, of course. Who is your second buy, though?
Yeah, and again, this is super annoying because I talked about both the starting running back of the Falcons in the running back video and the starting running wide receiver so far of the Falcons with Drake London in this video. And I talked about the starting running back of the Miami Dolphins, Devon Achane, in the running backs video. Now I'm going to talk about their best receiver, Tyreek Hill, in the wide receivers video. It's pretty simple here. Tyreek Hill, for my money, is still the most physically imposing wide receiver in the NFL, maybe outside of like Justin Jefferson. Snoop Huntley overthrew him on like what would have been like a 70-yard touchdown in Monday night's game. And there were some penalties that took away, him having 100 yards or 150-yard type of performance plus a long touchdown where Miami couldn't do shit. Like, that was the absolute floor of the Miami Dolphins offense, what we witnessed on Monday night. The routes, the game environments have been really bad for Miami. We've been talking about this with Achane. We've talked about this here with Tyreek Hill. They have an easier game against New England this week, and then they go into a bye, which will help them reset. Tyler Huntley is a better quarterback, in my opinion, than what he showed in week 5. I don't think he's a great quarterback necessarily, but it was his first game with the team. Ultimately, the thesis for buying Tyreek Hill is that Tua is coming back at some point. I'm not buying Tyreek Hill with the expectation that Snoop Huntley is going to start all season long. My thesis for buying Tyreek Hill is that it won't be this bad going forward as long as Huntley is playing. And then by week 8, which is when Tua's first eligible to come off of IR, and the reports are that he will come off of IR by week 8, Tyreek will be right back to being Tyreek Hill, who's probably the best receiver in fantasy, if not one of the 3 to 5 best fantasy wide receivers. So for me, I look at it as like, okay, if you're 3-1, if you're 4-0, you can handle a guy who's got a bye week in week 6. His bye week is coming up 2 weeks from now. You should be sending offers for Tyreek Hill, because if you're in a winning position right now, and let's say you're 4-3 by the time Tua comes back onto the field, or you're 5-2, or you're 6-1 by the time Tua comes back onto the field, this guy could win you your league.
Yeah, because people know that Tyreek Hill has been basically a low-end wide receiver 4 over the last couple of weeks. And like you said, having an early bye week, it's a complete placebo, because people are like, oh, I have to worry about week 5, week 6 in my lineup. It's like, you realize like every player has a bye week. Like, the only way that actually becomes a functional thing is when it's week 7, week 8, and we're talking about guys that already had their bye versus guys that haven't had their bye yet. The fact that we're going into bye weeks already and no player has had their bye yet, that shouldn't be a factor in a lot of people's minds. But, who knows? Maybe they're, 1-3, 2-2, even 0-4, and
I wouldn't
they're
recommend you
panicking
even
about it.
trade for Tyreek if you're in that situation, to be honest. I think this is a 3-1.
No, I'm saying the people that have Tyreek
right.
might be in a position where they're 1-3, they're 0-4, and they're like, oh shit, he also has a bye week in week 6. Therefore, I have to get him off my team right now. Again, we're talking about like the psychological factors of fantasy football. If someone sees they're already in a hole and they know they're going to be without a guy like Tyreek Hill, they may even be thinking they're pulling a fast one on you because you don't know that he's got a week 6 bye. But that's why we take advantage. I mean, some of these deals, I guess Terry McLaurin's a common theme because one is Terry McLaurin straight up for Tyreek Hill. The other is McLaurin plus Jacobs. Yeah, go out and get Tyreek Hill, especially if you're deep at
probably a little bit more of a fair deal, I would say. Jacobs and McLaurin.
And maybe you picked up a guy like Jordan Mason, for example, and that makes it easier to let go of a guy like Josh Jacobs. That's a perfect opportunity to be able to capitalize on. Tyreek Hill plus Nathaniel Dell, Tank Dell for DK Metcalf plus Michael Pittman. Funny because we'll talk about Michael Pittman in a second, but I think this is a very good transition deal to make as well. Tyreek versus DK Metcalf, I think is relatively close rest of the season, and I would actually much prefer still, despite him missing last week, Tank Dell to Michael Pittman. And then this year you also have listed at the bottom, DK plus Shaheed for Tyreek Hill. Again, if you're 4-0, 14-team league, go do this. Let's straight up.
Yeah, exactly. He's precisely the type of player that, like, I would much rather trade for Tyreek if you're thinking long-term, if you're thinking fantasy playoffs, if you're thinking that time of year, then go after someone who's currently injured, like Christian McCaffrey or Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. People think, oh, I'm going to trade for a guy who's injured right now so that I can, be ready for the fantasy playoffs. It's way less risky, in my opinion, to trade for someone whose quarterback is injured than someone who's currently injured themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Because also people are going to know the reason why you're coming for Puka, the reason that you're coming for Cooper Kupp is going to be because they're injured, and they're going to be almost hesitant to give you a really good deal on that because they know exactly what you're doing. But Tyreek Hill, he's still playing on the field and he's giving bad production. Like, people will have a sour taste in their mouths because the last time we saw Cooper Kupp on the field, he was averaging over 20 PPR points per game. The last time we just seen Tyreek Hill on the field, he's gone under 10 points in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and again, he was missed for like a long touchdown. I think even the Snoop Huntley production will be more wide receiver 2 production for the next 2-3 games that Snoop Huntley is the starter, or Skylar Thompson, whoever ends up being the starting quarterback. But once Tua is back on the field, I mean, we saw one game with Tyreek and Tua this year. He had 25 PPR points, and last year he averaged 25 PPR points when Tua was on the field because he's an absolute superstar, and he was the type of dude that I was willing to take 101, 102, 103 in drafts for a reason. So my number one sell, a guy that has had 2 really, really excellent performances the last couple of weeks, is Diontae Johnson. He's been high target share, producing fantasy points. The worry I have for Diontae Johnson, this is kind of narrative-y, but my worry is that he's Diontae Johnson. That's my biggest worry with Diontae Johnson. Everybody's looking at him like he's a wide receiver 1 all of a sudden, but Andy Dalton is playing at an extremely high level right now, and I'm not sure that's going to continue. I think he can play well. He's definitely better than Bryce Young. I think that's an open and shut case at this point in time. But is it going to continue that Andy Dalton plays like a top 10 NFL quarterback like he's currently playing right now? Do they ever go back to Bryce Young too? There's also a possibility.
I doubt that.
Maybe not, but they have to kind of maybe see what they have with Bryce if they're not 100% convinced that he's not the future of this franchise. Again, maybe that's...
They made their decision on that when they benched the first overall pick. I think it's more of a case, honestly, where, like you said, Dalton is playing above his head right now, and people are very optimistic over the last 2 weeks of Diontae. We've seen Diontae have stretches like this before. Expecting him to just be a wide receiver 1 rest away is very ambitious. And on top of that, you haven't even gone on to the fact that Xavier Legette looked phenomenal this week. What if Xavier Legette gets full-time routes moving forward? I think there's a very real possibility this could be a 1A, 1B situation rather than an alpha number 1 situation like it's been the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, 24% target share for Xavier Legette in his first game. It was his first game getting a full-time route participation as well. Diontae Johnson's a good option. If you have Diontae Johnson, you probably feel pretty good as him as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, wide receiver 3, maybe if you went running back heavy. But Diontae Johnson is precisely the type of guy that you need to use to tier up to Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins potential. I mean, T. Higgins a little bit closer, but like Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, and Garrett Wilson, and maybe even Tyreek Hill if you can use Diontae Johnson in a package. The guys that we've talked about the last 2 weeks as good wide receiver trade targets, precisely the type of player you should be using is Diontae Johnson, because I feel very similar about Diontae Johnson as I would have if Bryce Young was better than he'd been so far this year. It's like, okay, if Diontae Johnson hits, he's probably a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2, best case scenario. That's how I feel about him rest of season, assuming Dalton is going to start the rest of the way. But I still think Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, Drake London have wide receiver 1 in their range of outcomes at this point in time. So that's how I would be using Diontae Johnson, given the fact that he's been a top 10 receiver the last 2 games.
Yeah, 100%. When I'm looking at where I have Diontae Johnson rest of the season, he's more of a high-end wide receiver 3 for me. I think he definitely has to be a riser because of how he's looked. But if people are going to be treating him already as like a top 15 wide receiver rest of the season, like I think people can say, well, he's been top 10 each week with Dalton. He's going to continue this moving forward. If that's the expectation. I mean, we mentioned Drake London. I think that's another really good option to be able to go after. Maybe somebody's worried about Chris Olave, which I don't know why they would be, but that's the range we got to be going after. Can Diontae Johnson get you up to any wide receiver we'd be valuing as a top 2-round pick rest of the season?
Yeah, probably. I mean, and also too, with Diontae Johnson and the way Andy Dalton has played, Chicago Bears on the matchup chart this week, they're the 3rd best against fantasy wide receivers. So that's a tough
Very underrated defense.
Very, very underrated defense. Atlanta Falcons next week is AJ Terrell on Diontae Johnson. That's something that you'd have to worry about. Washington in week 7, obviously that's an easy matchup, but Denver Broncos, we all know what that means. Patrick Surtain's an absolute nails corner. And then in week 9, you have the New Orleans Saints, who've also been very good against fantasy wide receivers. And of course, they have Marshawn Lattimore as well. So it's not a good situation schedule-wise for Diontae Johnson. This will, in my opinion, be his peak value all season long. I think everybody's going to recognize that he's a high-end wide receiver 3 as soon as a couple games go by. And right now, maybe people are viewing him as a mid-wide receiver 2 or even potentially higher than that. So that's why you have to be at least shopping Diontae Johnson.
Agreed. Again, this is the stock exchange for a reason. We're not saying Diontae Johnson is a bad asset. In fact, Andy Dalton is exactly what we needed for him to not be a dead asset. Because quite frankly, before Andy Dalton got inserted, people were talking about Diontae Johnson as being one of the biggest busts in fantasy. So knowing the overall reputation, the overall feel for the market when a player's at their low point, and understanding when they are at their high point that, oh shit, like he's a volatile asset. Maybe I should get off for a safer asset moving forward. This is why we buy and sell on a week-to-week basis. And that is the big rationale for why I'm selling Michael Pittman Jr. If you have Michael Pittman Jr., I mean, he was a great play this week. He had, 17.3 PPR
He was a great play on all of your benches because he had been horrible prior to this week.
Exactly. And I think that's the main reason. I think this offense genuinely worries me to the point where Pittman isn't dynamic enough to make up for just having a big target share on this team. Because this Colts offense has not lived up to expectations. Anthony Richardson hasn't been an accurate quarterback thus far. And on top of that, Josh Downs has a real opportunity to throw a wrench into Pittman's dominant start. Because we've seen a guy in Michael Pittman, despite averaging a 30% target share on the season, is giving you less than 10 PPR points per game. Now, people could say, oh, positive regression. He's going to go up. I think almost the inverse in that he's had such a dominant target share. Now, Josh Downs has come in the first 2 weeks with a 36% targets per route run rate and has flat out outplayed Michael Pittman so far on the season. I mean, like you see in the last 2 weeks, Josh Downs, 13.7 PPR points per game. Michael Pittman on the season, 9.3. People are going to look at the 17.3. People are going to look at the target share numbers. And in fact, I honestly think Pittman is a good sell high in sharper leagues because people will track this usage. People will see the 17.3 and think this is what we can expect moving forward. I still have concerns about Anthony Richardson as a whole. And on top of that, Michael Pittman, we saw be a literal dead asset in fantasy markets just 2 weeks ago. Off of the first 3 games where he had 7.1, 5.1, and 7.6 PPR points, Michael Pittman was being treated as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 on the market. So I'm not letting a 17.3 point performance completely impact my thought of Michael Pittman moving forward, knowing just how low the floor is in terms of his valuation. Because I'm looking at some of these deals. Josh Jacobs, we love moving forward. We saw exactly what we need to see from this Packers offense, high volume offense. And even with Jordan Love throwing the ball 51 times, we know Josh Jacobs is going to have a ton of goal line equity. On top of that, again, there's just simply not going to be an offense that throws the ball 50 times per game like we saw against the Vikings. Very skewed game script down early in the game. In games where the Packers, who are, I think, is still a very solid team, a 10, 11, 12 plus win team when Jordan Love is in the lineup. They're going to be favored
probably 85% of their games going forward.
Exactly. So if you can transition that into a bell cow on a really good offense with the Packers, and all it costs you is Pittman and Singletary, you're doing it every single time. This deal, I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, if you need a quarterback and you substituted Justin Fields out, sure. Like, say this was Jaden Danielson Leggett, I think that would be more palpable in the lineup. I personally wouldn't be making this for Fields, but same type of process. If you can take Pittman plus Charbonnet, go after a guy like Xavier Leggett, who I think has higher upside than Pittman moving forward, and maybe you need a quarterback, and it's not Fields, but it's like Kyler or Stroud or someone like that, willing to do that type of deal. On top of that, I mean, we have a couple at the bottom here. If you need running back production, running back upside, I think Bucky Irving's got some good upside moving
I'd probably rather have Pittman in that side of the deal personally.
I don't disagree, but if you did need a running back play, I don't think it's all that all that different, to be honest. I think they're pretty comparable. But this is the type of deal I'm looking to as well. Pittman for Kareem Hunt and Jordan Addison. Pittman's off of a high. Jordan Addison, people might think, oh, I got to sell high now because he looked really good and he only played 1 week this year. If this type of deal is available in your league, I straight up have Addison ranked higher than Pittman the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think the other part that we're kind of discounting too is like the Indianapolis Colts right now are second lowest, in pass rate over expectation right now. They run the ball like crazy when Anthony Richardson is out there. And most of the game, Joe Flacco was the quarterback, and Joe Flacco was much more accurate than Anthony Richardson. Joe Flacco probably has more trust of Shane Steichen to be able to uncork it and throw the football. So Anthony Richardson's not majorly injured. There's a minute chance he misses this week. He's actually not practicing today, but honestly, I expect him to play this week against Jacksonville. The one thing I would say about Pittman, and the reason I didn't pick him because he was the first person that came to my mind as a potential sell high, is that Jacksonville is literally dead last against wide receivers. So I think that it's possible he's a better sell high next week than he is this week.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Maybe you wait a week to sell him, but the point does remain that I think he's a very market volatile asset at this point. And again, maybe you wait until after the Jacksonville week because that is a good point. They are very bad against the pass.
Especially if Flacco plays too. If Flacco is the starter, that would be a huge reason to sell him high.
100%. But regardless, whether it's you sell this week or whether it's a delete 1 week type of sell, the point is Michael Pittman is not a guy I want to be holding long term. And we haven't even mentioned the fact that this has been without AD Mitchell getting any single snaps.
Like AD Mitchell leads all wide receivers in average separation right now.
Like he's gotten open and he just hasn't gotten the snaps yet. Like what happens when he becomes a more integral part of this offense? Like honestly, from a pure talent standpoint, this might sound crazy if you're a Colts fan and you've seen what Pittman's done in the last couple of years, but I could even make the argument from a talent standpoint. Is Pittman the third best receiver on this team?
I mean, the one thing I will say that's bullish for the Colts offense and Anthony Richardson as a potential buy low is that I think all three of those wide receivers are very talented.
Yeah.
And there's a possibility that if Richardson can figure his shit out or if Flacco gets in there, like they all might be very fantasy relevant.
And there's just a lot of factors that go into Pittman if you are a believer. But I'd rather get out now on a high and mitigate the risk moving forward.
Yeah, it's like you said, if he's been commanding a 30% target share going forward and he's only had one half decent game where nobody actually started him and Joe Flacco played like 3/4 of that game, then there's a pretty good chance that he's probably not going to be that great rest of the season. Because if he was going to be good with Anthony Richardson, he would have already had a couple good games so far this year, even though he's been commanding the targets. And like I said, and this was a reason why we were off Pittman coming into the season, it's like I figured they were going to be very run heavy with Richardson at quarterback because he's not the type of guy you want dropping back 35 times a game.
Well, the thing that makes Pittman so good, like as an NFL receiver, is timing, in-breaking routes, possession receiver. If you're going to have a low-volume offense that when they do throw, wants to throw it down the field with Anthony Richardson, that is not the expertise of Michael Pittman the way he plays.
No, he would be an excellent player in like a timing rhythm-based Kansas City Chiefs, 49ers, Green Bay Packers type of offense like that. He would be a lot better of a fit. And it's not like Shane Steichen doesn't run those concepts. It's just that the quarterback that they have in place right now is not going to operate that way. If Joe Flacco, if Richardson was out for the year and Joe Flacco was going to start all season long, Michael Pittman is probably a top 18 receiver rest of season.
Yeah, no, that is a big caveat. And again, that's just simply not going to happen. He's been hurt, but at the same time, he's given enough explosives to this offense. While it hasn't been consistent on a down-to-down basis, we've seen every week this guy make 70-plus yard plays and make throws that maybe 3 guys on the planet are capable of making with Richardson.
Yeah, and that's precisely why I would wait one more week to sell Pittman too, is because if Richardson plays and gets re-injured and Flacco is going to start for extended periods of time, there's a good chance you'd actually want to hold on to Pittman too, as opposed to selling him right now. But again, shop Diontae, shop Pittman on the open market, see what you can get. Again, this was wide receiver trade targets, buys, sells. We gave you a bunch of names that we're going after, a couple honorable mentions like Flowers and Ayuk and Wilson, Odunze, the guys that we talked about at the beginning of this video. So if you enjoyed, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Our rest of season rankings are fully up to date. I updated mine today. You updated yours today. If you guys want to make some trades, you can use our trade calculator over on Flock Fantasy. You can use it for free when you just use the regular expert rankings, which is a combination of myself, Danny, and the other experts on the site. But if you want our specific opinion, you do need to be a site subscriber for that. Promo code FSE gets you 30% off, 7 days for free, 6 months annually when you sign up over there, as well as a free team review voucher. If you sign up annually with code FSE, we can actually review your redraft team, suggest trades for you, suggest moves that you can make. Same goes for Dynasty if you guys are Dynasty players as well. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.